growing as a pre-party organization, and the development of MCU's political line. MCU Central Committee, November 2024.
Note from Audiobook Maker. The document contains many important food notes. Please read the original document to get the full understanding intended by the authors.
During our second national conference, MCU resolved that our primary task at present is to grow and develop as a pre-party organization. This was based on an assessment that to develop a proletarian vanguard party, we need to win over those who can spread Marxism to the working class, consolidate them to MLM and our political line, and work in various ways to bring about the fusion of Marxism and the working class movement. While we previously have emphasized, correctly, the need for our cadre to join with the working class movement, carry out work among the industrial proletariat, and win over the semi-Marxists in the union movement specifically, our experience over the last year has helped us to develop a more scientific understanding of how to grow and develop as a pre-party organization. The growth and development of MCU requires both quantitative expansion and qualitative improvement. Quantitative expansion means recruiting new cadre and developing new supporters. To recruit new cadre and develop supporters, we need to propagate our line, popularize our work, debate various revisionist and opportunist trends, and educate and develop people so they can be ready to become cadre and supporters. Qualitative improvement means becoming more disciplined internally, getting more organized, raising our theoretical and ideological level, and Bolshevizing ourselves in an all-around fashion. First and foremost, this has entailed refining our internal division of labor to allocate sufficient cadre to the tasks required for our growth and development. We discuss these tasks in greater detail below. It has also involved developing clear internal policies and guidelines for practices of democratic centralism, internal reporting, and more. Given the low level of development of the working class movement, as well as our small numbers and organizational limitations, we cannot, at present, make leading the struggles of the proletariat our main focus. With our limited forces, we cannot reasonably send a significant number of comrades into every major union in the country, let alone every major industrial workplace. If we are to carry out the numerous tasks required for our growth, such as leading studies, developing a robust social media presence, making and recruiting contacts, engaging in theoretical debate, etc., as well as our other organizational tasks, we can realistically only send a relatively small percentage of our cadre into the labor union movement. Only once we have significantly grown and developed as an organization can we systematically work to bring about the fusion of Marxism and the working class movement. Only once we have a much larger and more developed pre-party organization can we carry out the difficult task of winning over a large number of advanced and intermediate workers to our line, a task which requires a highly developed apparatus capable of carrying out wide-ranging propaganda, studies for workers, and significant organizing among the proletariat. While we do not yet have the forces or influence to win over a large number of the proletariat, we can build up these forces by winning over semi-Marxists to MLM and MCU's political line. There are tens of thousands, if not more, semi-Marxists in the U.S. who are, in various ways and to various degrees, grappling with Marxism and trying to apply it to the present conditions in the U.S., while some of these people are consolidated to various negative trends, e.g. social democracy, tanky politics, Trotskyism, etc. The vast majority are relatively unconsolidated and therefore can potentially be won over. However, even among the unconsolidated majority, there exists deep confusion on Marxism broadly, and revolutionary strategy specifically. Therefore, to win over those who can potentially become bearers of revolutionary theory, to the proletariat we need to struggle against opportunist and revisionist deviations that abound in the U.S. semi-Marxist milieu. In this way, our situation is analogous to that of the early Russian Marxists, who had to wage a struggle first against Narodnism and then legal Marxism to win over revolutionaries to the correct political line. The task today is somewhat more complicated given that so many confused and negative trends abound in the U.S. left. We need to focus the bulk of our efforts on growing through recruiting those semi-Marxists who we can win over to MLM and our line. In doing so, we will win over a large number, dozens, hundreds of recruits, and train them to become bearers of revolutionary theory to the proletariat. Only if we grow and develop sufficiently as an organization will we be able to take advantage of the openings in the larger society, spread Marxism among the working class, and effectively lead the proletariat's struggles. To conduct this struggle effectively and recruit new cadre into MCU, we have identified 5 main undertakings. First is participation in semi-Marxist circles. Second is a systematic and methodical approach to contacts. Third is our education work for contacts, sympathizers, and supporters. Fourth is carrying our agitation and propaganda specifically online and through social media. Fifth is our work in the labor unions. We elaborate on each of these points in further detail below. However, it is first helpful to explain how our new line developed over the past year. 1. Reflections on our prior line. Over the last year, we have made tremendous progress organizationally, with our political line, and in our strategy and tactics. However, in deepening our understanding of MLM and developing our political line, we made a series of mistakes. These are somewhat inevitable, given that we were making major changes in our line, which required us to take up new tasks and fronts of work. As we have gained experience and learned from our successes and failures, we have been able to refine our line and correct mistakes, including some which, despite our prior inexperience, we could have avoided. Therefore, it can be helpful to refer to what we wrote in public-facing documents like SOME, General Theses on Communist Work, in the Trade Unions, and MCU and the Working Class Movement, and explain how this theory was tied to our practice. This will help to clarify how our line has developed and how our thinking has shifted as we gained more experience over this past year. This is particularly important because our newfound clarity is a significant corrective to our previous line. A. Our theses document and related practical work. In Theses, we wrote of 3 different stages of development of communist work in the unions and the struggle to win leadership over these unions and the working class movement more broadly. We noted that in the current stage,
there is no strong communist organization, much less a party, and no organized left-wing opposition to the reactionaries and opportunists in the trade unions. The central tasks here are to develop the organization of communists and lay the groundwork for a party, side by side with laying the groundwork for an organized left opposition across the trade union movement. An organized opposition for the whole trade union movement that truly takes up the struggle for working class emancipation cannot be created in one stroke. We should remember it took William Z. Foster nearly a decade to get the TEL off the ground and on solid footing. It will take us leading various campaigns against sellout contracts and reactionary leaders, leading unionization drives amongst the unorganized, strengthening ties with existing better groupings like Railroad Workers United, and generally making links with more militants across the country. And it will take considerably growing and strengthening our ranks of professional revolutionaries. That said, with the contacts we have already, we can and must begin laying the foundation by engaging with them in studies of Marxism and labour history, collaborating on organising campaigns across different unions, and debating what the programme of the organised left wing of the trade union movement should be in our context. These studies and discussions, if correctly carried out, will enable us to arrive through some struggle at a correct line to unite the advanced elements in the unions around a programme of class struggle in the labour movement, a programme which goes far beyond the liberal phrase mongering around an ill-defined class struggle unionism. In this stage, a key task is to engage with and win over, at least to some degree, the activists pouring into the labour movement at present who are interested in Marxism. This first and foremost requires investigation of these forces, analysis of various contending lines and contradictions among them, and identification of better groups and trends that are part of this relatively recent phenomenon. We must then, in turn, develop a plan and basis of unity around which to unite these forces in the struggle to make abolition of the wages system the watchword of the trade union movement. Only by understanding these trends and identifying more promising sections can we develop a clear plan to unite the best of these forces.
There are numerous correct aspects to this analysis, including the need to develop our pre-party organization, to work in the unions with an eye towards building a larger left-wing opposition, and to lay the foundation for the party. However, there are also some significant shortcomings. First, we place the task of laying the groundwork for the party on the same footing as laying the groundwork for an organized left opposition in the unions. While we acknowledge that developing a TUL-like organization would take considerably growing and strengthening our ranks of professional revolutionaries, we did not understand at that time that we would need to further grow and develop as a pre-party organization to even begin to lay the foundation for an organized left-wing opposition in the unions. This confusion caused us to devote a significant amount of time to trying to build up this foundation with various individuals, both union workers and Marxists, before we had the objective capacity to do so in a meaningful sense. This meant that we wasted time trying to build up something that was objectively not feasible to develop at the time. We therefore diverted comrades from other key tasks, such as developing a systematic approach to recruitment or launching our organization's social media presence to promote our line and our work, to instead focus on laying the foundation for an organizational form, an organized left-wing opposition in the unions, which we were not sufficiently developed to create. Our efforts to lay the foundation for a left-wing opposition in the unions followed in the wake of our work in the UPS contract struggle in the summer of 2023. During this struggle, we had built up many contacts across the labor union movement and among the broader Marxist milieu in the U.S. We hoped to work with them to establish regular meetings that would involve both the study of Marxism and the sharing of practical organizing experience in the unions, to eventually form some sort of united front organization for work in the labor unions. In our work in this grouping, which eventually became known as the Labor Militant Study, LMS, once it became clear that we would largely just be doing a joint study with others, we had four broad goals. Carry out a study of a Marxist theory on the working class struggle to achieve political power and emancipate itself from capitalist rule, and the role of labor unions in that struggle. B. Historical lessons from the past, attempts of Marxists in the U.S. to organize in the labor unions against employers and sell out union officials, such as the work of the CPUSA in the TUL. Learn from the organizing campaigns participants are involved in, and as far as possible, facilitate cooperation amongst participants on these campaigns. Begin forging a more refined and concrete program for the trade unions that can become the program of a TUL-type organization for our present conditions. Draw more like-minded people who are involved or looking to get involved in the working class movement and lay the foundation for a solid organization of revolutionary-minded militants that reaches across unions. These goals were far too broad, and we did not have sufficient cadre or contacts to carry these out well. While we had around 60 people interested in this effort outside of our cadre, They were from a variety of political backgrounds and levels of development. For example, initial participants ranged from militant workers who had basically no familiarity with Marxism, but who had years of experience fighting against the capitalists and reactionary union leaders, to fairly developed Marxists who were very interested in learning about our line and joining MCU. Given their different levels of political and theoretical development, it was not feasible to develop all these contacts well in a single study, let alone also bring them all together in practical organizing efforts, especially since they were dispersed around the country, many in locations without any MCU cadre or branches. Drawing many contacts into large-scale practical organizing efforts in the unions is, of course, feasible in the longer term. However, fairly specific and distinct types of studies are needed for respectively winning over semi-Marxists to become cadre and developing the class consciousness of intermediate workers. These two tasks cannot be fused into one, and they certainly cannot be also fused with the task of uniting left-wing forces in the unions around a joint program of struggle against the capitalists and reactionary union officialdom. While these mistakes flowed, in part, from our relative dearth of forces, which prevented us from carrying out simultaneously these three separate tasks, this was not the ultimate source of our mistakes. Rather, it was the incorrect aspect of our political line that put the development of MCU on par with laying the foundation for an organized left-wing opposition in the unions. The former task is our principal task at present, while the latter is a secondary task, which we can only make some smaller progress towards at present while we grow and develop as an organization. Despite these mistakes, in the LMS and other efforts in this period, we did focus significant time and energy on growing and developing MCU. Given this partially correct orientation, we also had numerous successes, both in LMS and in our work more broadly in this period. For example, a number of participants from LMS were won over to our line and went on to become cadre. Other participants, including some of the workers from the UPS struggle, developed an understanding of some of the basics of Marxism through LMS, and have become stronger supporters of MCU and stronger participants in the working class movement. Our mistakes and shortcomings notwithstanding, these are significant successes. They are the result of the correct aspect of our line in this period, which emphasized the importance of developing MCU. B. MCU and the working class movement. MCU and the working class movement constituted a major theoretical advance for us as an organization, and was the first public document in which we systematically summed up the mistakes of our previous line. This document was particularly important as, in it, we were able to clarify some fundamental aspects of Marxism, especially the nature of the proletariat's economic struggles, their relation to political struggles, and the role communists should play in these struggles. In U.S. Maoist circles, confusion on this foundational lesson of Marxism has reigned supreme since at least 1978. When the RCP decided to withdraw from leading the economic struggles of the class. This confusion is, of course, intimately tied to the broader confusions in U.S. left circles, particularly the postmodern movementist theories of social change. In summing up our previous mistakes and explaining the path forward, we largely put forward a correct line. However, we made some important secondary mistakes. These mistakes were closely related to, but somewhat distinct from, the mistakes we made in the theses document. One strength of MCU and the working class movement is that we spelled out more explicitly the tasks required to develop MCU, and, in particular, those required to win over the semi-Marxists to MLM and our line. In this sense, the document was already a partial corrective to theses in which we had overemphasized the importance, at present, of work within the unions. For example, we noted,
We must be emphatic, however, that communist work does not consist solely of practical organizing. In particular, there is a lot of theoretical work that needs to be done. This includes consolidating our ranks ideologically through intensive systematic study, dissemination of revolutionary theory as it has been developed thus far, including via polemics against various opportunist and revisionist trends, as well as new scientific work to further develop the theory. At certain points in the revolutionary movement, the theoretical and ideological tasks need to take precedence over any practical organizing. And indeed, the National Committee considers this to be the case for us today. The fact that theoretical and ideological tasks at present take precedence does not in any way mean that practical work should be abandoned. Rather, it means that, to guide our practical organizing efforts, further develop our ranks, refine and solidify our strategy and tactics, and win others over to MLM, the main focus of our work must be on the theoretical and ideological tasks.
And
A crop of vaguely Marxist and revolutionary-minded youth, largely from a college-educated and petty bourgeois background, is pouring into working-class jobs and unions for the sake of uniting socialism with the working-class movement. This is incredibly important and promising, for amongst these youth we can develop a significant number of bearers of revolutionary theory to the advanced workers. If we can successfully win them over ideologically and organize them to be effective in their work in the unions. Doing so is key, since right now the biggest obstacle we face is the severe lack of ideologically solid forces to send amongst the workers. In this sense, and given the much lower level of class struggle, we are behind where the Russian Marxists were in 1897 when Lenin wrote The Tasks of the Russian Social Democrats. Our situation bears a few similarities in this regard to the situation of the Russian Marxists during the years preceding the Leagues of Struggle, where their main task was to wage the ideological struggle against Narodnism so that the main potential bearers of revolutionary theory to the working class, in that time the intelligentsia, could be won over to the correct theory. For this reason, ideological and theoretical work right now is of the utmost importance. To sum up our key conclusions thus far, because without revolutionary theory, there can be no revolutionary movement, and because one of the key barriers right now to making self-described communists an actual effective and leading force within the working class movement capable of raising the consciousness of advanced workers is our considerable ideological weakness. We in MCU and all US Maoists generally must prioritize waging ideological struggle, raising our theoretical level, and carrying out much-needed new theoretical work, so that we may begin acquiring the sort of profound scientific knowledge Lenin emphasized was absolutely necessary for modern socialist consciousness. Because the most promising advanced workers, as well as other potential bearers of revolutionary theory from amongst the petty bourgeoisie, are immersed in union struggles, particularly amongst important sections of the industrial proletariat. Because the only real, if still extremely weak, proletarian class movement in the US is currently the economic movement. And because of the central role of the industrial working class in the long-term strategy for revolution, our ideological work must be indissolubly bound up with practical work in the unions and economic fights of industrial workers, though our practical tasks on the whole must remain subordinate to our ideological ones. As we develop our forces as Maoists, and as the labour movement itself develops and breaks out of the present backwardness that limits it solely to the labour union movement, this will of necessity change what needs to be the main focus of our work, and which of the three sides of the labour movement must be our overriding concern.
much of this is correct. Our recent organizational advances and successes speak to the correctness of much of what we put forward in MCU and the working class movement. We explained how the development of MCU as pre-party organization was contingent both on our internal development and winning over the potential bearers of revolutionary theory to our ranks. We also expressed clearly that our practical work in the unions had to be subordinate to other work, given our lack of forces to send among the working class to raise their class consciousness and win them over to Marxism. All of this constituted a significant advance beyond what we put forward in theses. However, there were certain imprecisions and mistakes in MCU and the working class movement. Shortly after the publication of this document, our erstwhile National Committee, NC, and National Labor Union Committee, LUC, jointly drafted an internal follow-up note on these topics to clarify some of the imprecisions in the original document. In particular, this follow-up noted that what we had called ideological work had both theoretical and practical components.
The distinction we drew in the document, MCWCM, between theoretical ideological work and practical work is imprecise. Within what could be called ideological work, there is a theoretical and a practical component. On the one hand, there is the work of study, research, synthesizing knowledge, etc. On the other hand, there are the various practical organizational tasks associated with actually bringing this theory to the proletarian masses at various levels.
The note also aimed to further clarify our primary task.
Actually, overall, all our work needs to be subordinated to raising communist consciousness and building up communist organization amongst the working class, i.e., to preparing for proletarian revolution. But because we can do this only in an extremely primitive and provisional fashion when communist forces are so few in number and weak theoretically, the foremost priority on the whole for our organization during this period needs to be the theoretical tasks of study, further research and investigation, and engagement in the theoretical debates, including on strategy and tactics, amongst the existing circles of Marxists and communists, especially those already turning towards the existing working class movement. This is key if we are to refine and clarify the theory to ourselves and to the other potential bearers, from whatever class background, of Marxist theory to the proletariat that are out there, which is an essential prerequisite for truly building up communist organization amongst the working class.
Despite providing some increased precision to our theoretical tasks, our follow-up note and MCU and the working class movement reflected a misunderstanding of what the main purpose of engaging in theoretical debates is at present, namely, to win over semi-Marxists and get them to join MCU. What's more, in addition to the theoretical tasks necessary to win over the semi-Marxists, i.e., debates over communist theory, we also have a lot of practical work to do to win them over. A good deal of our work, both locally and nationally, needs to be devoted to identifying potential recruits, developing them politically, through study, criticism, discussion, etc., and bringing them into MCU. When writing this follow-up note, we still significantly underestimated how many of our cadre would need to be devoted to the various tasks associated with this goal. Given that organizational growth and development is our primary task, it was incorrect to argue, as we did in the follow-up note, that the foremost priority has to be study, research, and further engagement in theoretical debates. All these tasks are important, but secondary. While we certainly needed to develop more theoretically, and still do, at the time that we wrote the note, our theoretical limitations were not a significant obstacle to rapid organizational growth and development. Rather, it was our organizational shortcomings, such as a lack of a concrete onboarding process, lack of clear general guidelines for meeting contacts and developing them into supporters and cadre, lack of plans to orient our local work around growing MCU, etc., which constituted a much larger obstacle. What's more, our focus in the document on theoretical debates was one-sided. While participation in various theoretical debates will lead to influxes of new contacts, our existing work and pre-existing theoretical clarity are also sufficient to draw in large numbers of people, both locally and nationally. Therefore, our primary focus at that time should have been on both growing via recruiting and developing new cadre, and developing our internal organizational capacity and ability to bring in larger influxes of recruits. Of course, we never denied the need to grow in our original documents, but our articulations did not sufficiently emphasize the central importance of this task, reflecting our lack of clarity on this. All these imprecisions and incorrect ideas resulted in us having an insufficient number of comrades locally and nationally devoted to the task of growing MCU, a mistake which was only rectified at our recent Second National Conference, where we ironed out a more rational division of tasks and labor. 2. Growing MCU and the path to the party. In the early years of our existence as MCU, we did not yet have sufficient experience or organizational capacity to develop a more systematic plan to grow as a pre-party organization. Our early efforts to grow were fairly experimental, as we tried to identify different openings for getting involved in various struggles and related opportunities to recruit and develop new cadre. Over time, as we gained experience, we came to better understand the relationship between theory and practice. And, especially within the last year, we came to more clearly and concretely understand that the eventual founding of a communist party in our country requires bringing about, at least to some degree, the fusion of Marxism and the working class movement. With this theoretical clarity on revolutionary strategy, as well as our practical experience from years of organizing and recruiting, we are finally in a place this year to develop a systematic plan to grow MCU as a pre-party organization and chart out a long-term trajectory to the founding of the party. This is a tremendous advance in our theoretical clarity, as well as our strategy. It has allowed us to much more rationally understand where to focus our efforts, how to structure MCU internally, and how to divide our labor. As noted above, our primary task of growth of MCU has 5 component parts: participation in semi-Marxist circles, a systematic and methodical approach to contacts, education work for contacts, sympathizers, and supporters, carrying our agitation and propaganda, specifically online and through social media, and work in the labor unions. If we carry out all of these undertakings well and in close coordination, we will not only grow as an organization, but we will also develop our influence in the working class movement and the larger society in such a way that we can eventually transform into a communist vanguard party fused with the most advanced section of the proletariat. A. Engagement with semi-Marxist circles. At times in the past, we scorned serious and systematic work among the semi-Marxists in the U.S. This was, in part, due to us seeing the many issues and negative trends which are ubiquitous among the U.S. left. However, it was more fundamentally motivated by a small group sectarian mentality, which prevented us from seeing how participation in semi-Marxist circles was an essential precondition for our large-scale growth and development as a pre-party organization. To win over the potential bearers of revolutionary theory, we must understand the overall lay of the land among semi-Marxists, as well as the particularities of various trends. This requires serious investigation into the existing semi-Marxist circles and some participation within them. At present, there are tens of thousands, if not more, semi-Marxists in the U.S., the vast majority of whom are relatively unconsolidated. It is only with an in-depth and concrete understanding of these circles that we will be able to discern how and where to best devote our forces and spend our time to rapidly develop a wide network of promising contacts who can be developed into sympathizers, supporters, and cadre. The exact manner of participation in semi-Marxist circles depends on the concrete circumstances of the groups and circles in question, of our work overall as MCU, and of the larger political situation. There are some opportunities to work with different established groups in various capacities. However, our participation in semi-Marxist circles cannot be limited to this. We also must attend events hosted by and spaces frequented by semi-Marxists, carry out studies, participate in key theoretical debates, and more. On the last point, we must develop an extremely clear and concrete understanding of the popular revisionist and opportunist theories and trends so that we can critique them and win over those who otherwise might be swayed by these trends. Lenin and other early Russian Marxists waged a pitched theoretical battle against Narodnism to win as many potential revolutionaries to Marxism as possible. To do so, they developed a very sharp theoretical critique of Narodnism and its specific analysis of Russian society. This was essential to win over those who might otherwise have been convinced of the correctness of Narodnism. Therefore, we must not limit our theoretical work to critique of various negative trends, especially the most popular and influential, but also carry out extensive MLM analysis of contemporary events and developments. Lenin's development of capitalism in Russia is a crucial example of just how important this sort of analysis is in the growth and development of a pre-party formation. As we grow and develop as an organization, the ways in which we participate in semi-Marxist circles will change significantly. In particular, as we grow significantly over the next few years, our principal task will change, and we will focus an increasingly larger percent of our forces on bringing about the fusion of Marxism with the working class movement. What's more, as our work grows and develops, and as we prove the correctness of our line in practice, semi-Marxists will tend to gravitate towards our work, provided we popularize our successes and carry out good agitation and propaganda. B. Systematic approach to contacts. Participation in semi-Marxist circles and our work overall has already generated a large number of contacts. As we get more organized and expand the scope of our work, we will face even larger influxes of contacts. Therefore, it is essential that we become as methodical as possible in our approach to contacts. First and foremost, we need to systematically train our cadres to assess contacts, develop them politically overall, which is not reducible to theoretical development, though this is an essential subcomponent, and win them over to our line. Doing this requires us to have skilled teachers and also have cadre who are capable of identifying the internal contradictions that contacts face and skilled at helping them to work through these contradictions. Given the rotten bourgeois society in which we live, even those who turn towards revolution and MLM will inevitably have internalized various backward, antisocial, and oppressive ideas. While these ideas may be latent in a given situation, in other circumstances, they can express themselves quite strongly. To understand which contacts we can develop into cadre, developing contacts into cadre takes a good deal of time and organizational resources. We need to be able to proactively identify each contact's key internal contradictions and discern if we can help them work through them. What's more, it is no insignificant thing for someone to reorganize their life to make revolution the central focus of their lives. Inevitably, contacts will have many questions, uncertainties, and internal struggles over this question, particularly at a time when revolution is a marginal trend in U.S. society. We therefore need to be skilled in helping promising contacts work through these matters so that they can learn to put politics in command in their life. All of this requires not just cadre, who are individually skilled at these tasks, but also an organized collective approach. This will help us overcome cadre's individual blind spots and shortcomings. It will also allow us to guide each contact's trajectory of development over a long period, even as they work with different cadre. For example, we may meet a contact through a local branch, get this contact involved in a national study, and then have them join a national mass organization under our leadership. To properly work together as MCU to develop contacts, we need to be systematic to ensure that the many different cadre who interact with each contact understand our evaluation of these contacts and therefore can help foster their further political development. This requires us to have well-functioning channels of communication internally and a strong collective work style between cadre across the country who work on different fronts of work. To have a well-functioning contact system, we need to chart out different paths of political development for contacts who are at different levels and who show different capabilities. Part of this is understanding how to develop contacts into cadre, and how different contacts will take different amounts of time to develop in this regard, and thus facilitate the growth of MCU. However, another aspect of this is understanding when a contact's trajectory of development should be towards becoming a supporter instead of a cadre, and how to get contacts excited about being supporters. No party or pre-party organization of any substantial size can hope to operate well without a wide network of supporters. The Bolsheviks, for example, relied on supporters for funding, aid in underground work, distribution of literature, and much more. It will be important to develop supporters capable of promoting our propaganda, overall organization, and aiding in our practical work in various ways. To function well, we need our contact system to be internally organized to handle the hundreds of contacts that we already have. This requires a high degree of organization, political unity, and sharing of lessons and experiences across the organization. We must also continuously evaluate, refine, and improve our contact system. This is particularly important because, as we grow and develop as an organization, this work will take on new dimensions. See external education work. As noted above, part of the way that we will develop contacts is through studies. At present, we plan on doing this through open studies on MLM, some of which will be online and national, and others of which will be local and in person. These studies will not only be a way to develop existing contacts, but also to reach new ones, and are part of our larger systematic plans to assess and develop contacts. Our external studies will cover foundational MLM theory, such as political economy, philosophy, and revolutionary history, and will run in short courses, e.g. 6 to 8 weeks. In each study, participants will not only learn about Marxism, but also engage in discussion and debate over these topics, and also talk through how to apply Marxism to their own lives and their internal contradictions. While the focus of the studies is largely theoretical and historical, and while the studies will help to more fully win over contacts to MLM, these discussions will help participants develop politically in an all-around fashion. Therefore, the studies will provide a means to assess and guide the development of contacts, especially isolated contacts. What's more, our prior open educational work has shown that these studies provide good opportunities to discuss and debate key political struggles in the semi-Marxist milieu. For example, in previous online studies, numerous questions have come up, including if China is socialist, if the U.S. is currently a settler colonial country, how to evaluate prostitution, and more. Therefore, studies will play a key role in winning over the semi-Marxists, both through further educating them about MLM and through discussing and debating various opportunist and revisionist theories in the studies themselves. D. Agitation and propaganda. At present, we can conduct only limited and provisional agitation and propaganda specifically directed at the working class movement. This is, on the one hand, a result of our small size and limited capacity. This limitation requires us to focus the bulk of our efforts on winning over the semi-Marxists to MLM and our line. On the other hand, it is due to our limited ties to the proletariat, which, while not insignificant, are still provisional and not wide-ranging. To significantly expand our ties to the proletariat and develop our influence among the class, we must first win over the semi-Marxists so that we can then, in time, send large numbers of cadre to the proletariat to lead their struggles and raise their consciousness in a coordinated and systematic fashion. Therefore, at present, the bulk of our agitation and propaganda must be directed towards activists and the semi-Marxist milieu. As we saw with the recent Palestine protests, this section of society consumes a lot of social media agitation and propaganda. Even with the limited political clarity and petty bourgeois radical politics of much of this media, it has been fairly effective in politicizing many and spurring them to action. This shows the basis to carry on mass political agitation and propaganda, principally via social media, to help win over semi-Marxists to MLM and MCU's line. To do this, we need to consistently produce high-quality media, in form and content, that popularizes MLM and our line by analyzing current events and emerging trends in society. This is a key part of how we can clarify that Maoism is the Marxism of our era, and that it is the only correct revolutionary theory and ideology. This will also help to popularize the work that we are doing and draw more contacts into our orbit. A work in labor unions. Our work in the labor unions is a secondary front right now, and it is relatively independent of our primary task of growing MCU. The specific tasks, policies, strategy, and goals of our work in the labor unions and the working class movement more broadly are outside of the scope of this document. However, the work we are presently doing on this front is tied to our growth as an organization, and therefore it is important to clarify how working in the labor unions will aid in our primary task. First and foremost, this is how we grow and develop our ties to the proletariat and our influence in the working class movement. Even our present efforts, provisional and modest though they are, provide a solid foundation on which to build. Once we have more cadre to send to the working class movement, whether as direct participants in the workplaces and unions, or as agitators and propagandists, this foundation will allow us to rapidly expand our influence in the working class movement. Therefore, even though our work in the labor unions is a secondary part of our primary task of growth, it is one which, if neglected, would undermine our long-term ability to develop into a communist vanguard party. What's more, our present work in the labor unions provides evidence of the correctness of our political line as well as our strategy and tactics. Given the prevailing empiricism and pragmatism in U.S. leftist circles, demonstrating the correctness of our approach in practice is integral to winning over semi-Marxists. While we need to struggle against empiricist and pragmatist tendencies, we also do need to demonstrate the results of our theory and our political line to contacts and potential recruits. These results provide evidence to support the theoretical and ideological struggle that we are simultaneously waging against revisionism and opportunism. They help to reinforce the lessons that contacts will learn from our documents, studies, agitation, and propaganda. Our work in the labor unions also provides a living example of how to apply MLM in the prevailing conditions in the U.S. Given the widespread confusion in the U.S. over Maoism, including in many Maoish circles, this is particularly important. Many on the left incorrectly believe that Maoism does not apply to an industrialized country. On the other hand, others, mostly the Maoish forces, incorrectly believe that Maoism should be applied in strange and adventurous ways. Therefore, it is incredibly important that we provide practical examples of how we are applying MLM to our concrete conditions to lead the struggles of the proletariat. Doing so will greatly aid the growth of MCU, given the near ubiquitous confusion about Maoism in the U.S. left. Lastly, our work in the labor unions provides an important way to link up with both advanced workers who are themselves semi-Marxist and can be recruited into MCU, and also other left-wing forces in the working-class movement. This not only will help us grow through developing more contacts and potential cadre, but also is a key factor in expanding our influence in the working-class movement and ultimately developing into a communist vanguard party. 3. Conclusion. Since our last conference in 2022, we have made tremendous strides as an organization both in our growth and internal development. Over the past year in particular, we have significantly developed our political line, theoretical clarity, and revolutionary strategy. Our collective spirit and proletarian determination have been essential to these developments and our broader advances as an organization. Through line struggle and comradely discussion and debate, we have come to clarity and unity on the fact that our primary task at present is to grow and develop as a cadre organization. Drawing lessons from the experiences of the early Russian Marxists, as well as other party-building efforts, we have come to the clarity that, right now, our organizational growth will primarily happen through winning over the semi-Marxists to MLM. The vast majority of these semi-Marxists are not consolidated to a particular ideology and have some mix of Marxist ideas as well as various liberal, social democratic, and opportunist ideas. In order to win over these semi-Marxists, we need to carry out a number of different types of work well and in close coordination. We must not only engage in theoretical debate to expose various opportunist and revisionist distortions of Marxism, but also become skilled at identifying those semi-Marxists who can be more easily won over to MLM. What's more, we need to further develop our skills and organizational capabilities to wage these struggles, both to win over promising contacts and to discredit backward theories. Our newfound organizational clarity on our primary task has helped us develop a more concrete sense of how we will develop into a larger pre-party organization and then a communist vanguard party. This is an important advance for communist politics in the U.S. As for the past half-century, since the degeneration of the RCP, there has been deep confusion on how to go about rebuilding a genuine communist party. Now we can chart a course forward, fresh off the heels of a successful conference with hundreds of contacts interested in our work. And with the internal organizational advances we made at the conference, we are in a very good position to grow rapidly into a strong pre-party organization. Comrades will continue to challenge themselves in this period of growth, breaking from small group and sectarian ways of relating to other groups, and boldly struggling in the open as communists. We will push ourselves to be sharper and stronger communists, who are respected and seen as leaders in the struggle for the liberation of the proletariat. We shall help contacts develop themselves to be well-rounded Marxists, while pushing ourselves to develop to higher and higher levels, facing our own internal contradictions head-on. Let us carry the banner of MCU with pride.
We communists never conceal our political views. Definitely and beyond all doubt, our future or maximum program is to carry China forward to socialism and communism. Both the name of our party and our Marxist world outlook unequivocally point to this supreme ideal of the future, a future of incomparable brightness and splendor.
Mao, on Coalition Government, April 24, 1945.